The night has a way of revealing things that the daylight tries to hide. Welcome back, Shadow Dwellers, to Mr. Shadow's Stories, the place where the darkness speaks and the truth is far more terrifying than any fiction ever written. I'm glad you're here tonight. Get comfortable, lock your doors, turn the lights up if you need to, because what you're about to hear didn't happen in a haunted mansion or an abandoned asylum. No, these stories happen somewhere far more ordinary, somewhere most of us have walked into without a second thought: a bar. You know the place: loud music, laughter, the clinking of glasses, warm lighting, and the smell of something being poured over ice. But when the last customer walks out, when the music dies, when the neon signs flicker off one by one, bars become something else entirely, something darker, something that the staff who close up every night know far too well. Tonight, I'm bringing you 4 creepy, true bar-closing staff horror stories, real accounts from real people who worked the closing shift and came face to face with things they still cannot explain to this day. These are not campfire tales. These are not made up for your entertainment. These events happened to actual human beings, and some of them never went back to work again. So if you're ready, let's step inside. The bar is closing, and something is already waiting. Story 1: The Man in the Back Booth. Submitted by a bar worker from Ohio. My name is Daniel, and I worked as a barback and occasional closer at a small neighborhood pub in Columbus, Ohio for about 3 years. The place had been around since the 1970s and had that kind of deep lived-in feeling. Dark wood walls, sticky floors despite how much you mopped them, and lighting that never seemed bright enough no matter how many bulbs you replaced. Most nights were fine, loud, busy, forgettable, but there was one night during a bitter February that I will never, for as long as I live, be able to forget. It was a Tuesday, which meant slow traffic. By 11:30, the last regular had paid his tab and shuffled out into the cold. I locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and started my usual routine, wiping down the bar, collecting glasses, running the mop across the floor. My manager, Lisa, had already left early because of a family situation, so I was completely alone. That wasn't unusual. I'd closed solo plenty of times before. I was behind the bar washing glasses when I noticed something in the mirror that ran along the back of the shelves, the one that reflects the entire floor of the bar. Someone was sitting in the back booth. Booth 6, the one tucked furthest into the corner, partially hidden by a support pillar and an old jukebox that hadn't worked in years. My stomach dropped. I spun around, and sure enough, a man was sitting there, just sitting, not moving. He was wearing a dark jacket, had his hands flat on the table, and his head was slightly bowed, like he was staring at the surface of the table in front of him. My first thought was embarrassment. I'd somehow missed a customer. I walked over, forcing a professional smile, and said, "Hey man, sorry about that. We're actually closed for the night. I'm going to have to ask you to head out." He didn't respond, didn't lift his head. I got closer. "Sir, we're closed. I need you to leave." Nothing. Now I was about 6 feet away from him, and something hit me. Something biological, something that your body knows before your brain does. My skin went cold. My legs felt heavy. because looking at this man up close, I realized that despite sitting completely still in a warm room, I could see his breath, thin white vapor curling upward from his face. The bar was not cold. I was sweating from mopping. I said his name louder, practically shouting now. "Sir, you need to leave." And that's when he raised his head. I can't fully explain what I saw. His face was there, eyes, nose, mouth, but the expression was completely, utterly blank. Not calm, not tired, blank, like a face drawn on paper rather than one that had ever experienced a single human emotion. His eyes were open and they were fixed on me, but I genuinely do not believe that he was seeing me. I backed up. I don't remember deciding to back up. My body just did it. I turned, walked as quickly as I could to the bar, grabbed my phone and my jacket, and called 911 from the parking lot. When the officers arrived and went inside, they found nothing. Booth 6 was empty. All the doors were still locked from the inside. I gave my 2-week notice the next morning by text message. I have never gone back inside that building. What the practical world might tell you, always do a full sweep of your establishment before locking up and never close entirely alone. But what the darkness whispers is something different. Some presences are not looking for a way in. They are already there, and they are simply waiting for everyone else to leave.
Submitted by a female bartender from Manchester, England. I worked nights at a bar in the northern quarter of Manchester for almost 4 years. It was a popular spot. Good cocktails, live music on weekends, the kind of place that's always packed and always buzzing. I loved the job, loved the people, and I never had a single strange experience the entire time I worked there. Until the night of October 12th. I remember the date because it was the night after my birthday. I'd had a big celebration the evening before, and I was tired and a little hungover, running on coffee and the kind of stubborn determination only bartenders and nurses truly understand. My colleague, Marcus, had called in sick, so I was closing alone. No big deal. I knew the routine. By midnight, everyone was out, the doors were locked, and I was doing my end-of-night cash count at the bar. That's when I heard it. Knocking. 3 knocks at the back door. The staff entrance, accessed through a narrow corridor behind the kitchen that led out to a small enclosed loading alley. I assumed it was Marcus. Maybe he'd felt better and had come to help out, or had forgotten something. I called out, "Who is it?" and got no answer. But the knocking came again. 3 slow knocks, patient and deliberate. I walked to the corridor, stopped just before the door, and said again, "Who's there?" 3 more knocks. Here's the thing about that back door. It only opened from the inside. There was no handle on the outside. The only way to knock on it was to press your knuckles directly against the steel surface, flat against the wall, in a space barely wide enough for a single person to stand in. It wasn't a door you just wandered up to. You had to know it was there. I looked through the small security viewer, a tiny glass peephole that gave a fisheye view of the alley outside. There was a woman standing there, young, maybe mid-20s, dark hair, pale skin. She was wearing a dress that was completely wrong for October in Manchester. Thin, short-sleeved, like something you'd wear in the height of summer. She was looking directly at the peephole, directly at me, though she couldn't have known I was looking. She raised her hand and knocked again, 3 times, slow. My instinct was compassion. Maybe she was in trouble. Maybe she'd been at a party nearby, lost her friends, was cold and scared. I almost opened the door, but something stopped me. She wasn't shivering. It was maybe 5 degrees Celsius outside, and she was in a summer dress, and she was not shivering even slightly. And her expression, like Daniel's man in the booth, was completely flat. No distress, no relief at seeing the peephole darken with someone looking back. Nothing. I stepped back from the door and called my manager, Steve, who lived 10 minutes away. I told him what was happening, and he told me to stay away from the door and wait. While I waited, the knocking continued at exactly the same rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause. 3 knocks, a pause. It continued for 22 minutes, and then it stopped. When Steve arrived and we opened the back door together, the alley was empty, no sign of anyone. But on the steel surface of the door, at exactly eye level, there were 3 faint smears, the kind left by the tips of fingers pressing softly against a surface rather than knocking. They were cold to the touch, not just room temperature, cold. What the practical world might tell you: never open a back door to a stranger, regardless of the situation. Always have a protocol for unknown visitors during closing hours. But what the darkness suggests is that sometimes the thing on the other side of the door is patient precisely because it knows time is on its side.
Story 3: The Regulars Who Came Back. Submitted anonymously by a bar manager from New Orleans. I managed a jazz bar in New Orleans for 6 years. If you know New Orleans, you know the city has a complicated relationship with the concept of death. It's present in the music, the culture, and the architecture. You grow up there, and you don't necessarily fear what most people fear. You learn to respect it instead. But even I was not prepared for what happened on a Thursday night in late August. I was closing with 2 of my staff, a bartender named Keisha and a floor worker named Pete. We were deep in the cleanup routine when Keisha called me over from across the bar with a strange look on her face. "Hey, who are those 2 at the end of the bar?" I looked up. 2 men were sitting at the far end of the bar, near the corner where we kept the extra bar stools stacked. Both were older, white-haired, wearing suits that looked like they were from another era entirely. Both had drinks in front of them, glasses of dark liquor, and both were sitting perfectly still, talking to each other quietly. My confusion was immediate. I had watched the door all night. I had done the sweep. I had locked up personally. I walked over, fully prepared to be firm, and then I stopped. I recognized them, both of them. Their names were Gerald and Roy. They had been regulars at my bar for years, nearly the entire time I'd managed the place. They came in every Thursday without fail, ordered the same drinks, sat in the same seats, and told the same jokes I'd heard 100 times. They were part of the fabric of the place. Gerald had passed away in March, a heart attack at home. We'd held a small memorial at the bar for him. Roy had died just 6 weeks after Gerald. We figured he'd never really recovered from losing his best friend. He passed quietly in his sleep. I was looking at both of them. They were there, solid, real. Keisha and Pete were both frozen behind me. Gerald looked up at me and smiled, the exact smile I'd seen hundreds of times before. He said, in his voice, his actual voice, "Don't look so worried, son. We just wanted one last drink." And then,
Between one blink and the next, they were gone. The stools were empty, but on the bar in front of those stools, 2 empty glasses, rings of condensation still wet on the wood beneath them. I keep those 2 glasses on a shelf behind my bar to this day. I've never washed them. What the practical world might tell you, grief can manifest in deeply unexpected psychological ways, particularly in spaces loaded with emotional memory. But what the darkness understands is that some bonds are simply stronger than the barrier between the living and whatever lies beyond it.
The laughing in the basement. This is a story I debated sharing for a long time, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me. I've stopped caring about that. I'm sharing it because I think people who work in bars and restaurants need to hear it, specifically people who close alone. I worked at a sports bar in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood. It was a newer building, maybe 15 years old, but it was built on a lot that had a long history. I didn't know what that history was at the time. I found out later. I was closing on a Saturday night, which is the busiest and most exhausting shift. By the time everyone was out and the doors were locked, it was nearly 2 in the morning. I had about an hour of cleaning ahead of me. I put on my headphones, started the music, and got to work. I had to go to the basement to swap out an empty keg. The basement was the standard bar basement: concrete floor, exposed pipes, caged bulb lighting, the kind of place nobody likes to spend time in, but everybody has to occasionally. I swapped the keg, turned to leave, and that's when I heard it, underneath my music. I pulled out one earbud. Laughter. Children's laughter. Coming from the far corner of the basement, behind the large metal shelving unit where we kept dry goods and spare supplies. I stood completely still. The laughter continued, high-pitched, light the way young children laugh when they're playing a game together. Multiple voices, at a minimum of 2, possibly 3. My rational mind immediately started generating explanations: sound traveling from neighboring buildings, a television somewhere above me. My exhausted brain is playing tricks after a 10-hour shift. I said loudly, "Hello?" Then the laughter stopped instantly. Then, from directly behind the shelving unit, something knocked against the wall 3 times, slowly. I left. I went up the stairs, grabbed my bag, and walked out the front door. I did not finish my closing duties. I did not count the cash. I called my manager from my car and told him exactly what happened and that I was not going back inside. He didn't fire me because when he went in the next morning with our head of security to check the basement, they found something that hadn't been there before. Written on the concrete wall behind the shelving unit, in what appeared to be chalk, were 5 small handprints, child-sized. The building's prior history, which I researched obsessively afterward, included the information that the lot had previously housed a tenement building that was demolished in the 1940s. In 1937, there had been a fire in that building. 3 children had died in the basement where they'd been sheltering. There is no logical explanation for those handprints. I never worked a closing shift there again. What the practical world might tell you is always make sure you know the history of the building you work in. Trust your instincts. If something tells you to leave, leave. Your paycheck is never more worth than your safety or your peace of mind. But what the darkness teaches us is that tragedy leaves marks on a place that no renovation, no demolition, and no passage of time can fully erase. 4 stories, 4 bars, 4 moments when the ordinary world pulled back its mask and showed something underneath that nobody asked to see. Whether you believe in the paranormal
or prefer to find rational explanations for all of these accounts, the fear these people felt was absolutely real. The impact these events had on their lives was absolutely real. And the simple, undeniable fact that they happened in places as familiar and as everyday as your neighborhood bar, that is perhaps the most unsettling part of all. Because horror doesn't only live in the abandoned places, the forgotten places, the places we already fear. It lives in the places we think we know, the places we feel safe. And sometimes, when the last customer has gone, when the lights are low, when you're the only one left and you're sure of it, you are not as alone as you think. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember, the closing shift isn't over until you're safely on the other side of that door. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight here on Mr. Shadow's Stories. If these stories reached deep into that cold, quiet part of you that knows the darkness is real, then you already know that this channel is where you belong. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications, because I have more stories waiting in the shadows, more real accounts, more terrifying truths, more voices that refused to stay silent. The night is long, shadow dwellers, and the stories never stop. Until next time, watch your back, and whatever you do, don't close alone.